Downing Street says no limit on the honours that may be bestowed on Team GB after an amazing fortnight. As Rio drew to a spectacular close, the speculation mounts on how the nation will say, well done. So, might it be Sir Mo, Dame Laura and Sir Jason, Sir Andy, Lady Nicola, and how many more?
I don't think there's any nation that's actually increased their medal haul over a 5-game period. That's, so we are actually up there now with the superpowers.
Also this lunchtime, jails within jails propose to curb the radicalisation of would-be terrorists behind bars. The heartbreak and the anger of those who lost friends and family in the Shoreham air crash a year on to the day. And the growing tide of depression among middle-class teenage girls and the role of social media.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. There was no dampening by Downing Street of the clamour to honour the British men and women who made history in Rio. The PM's office said there would be no limit to the number of honours that might be awarded in recognition of an amazing fortnight of achievement. The Games ended spectacularly last night as the torch was handed on to Tokyo for 2020. Heading home, the largest number of medals Team G have ever won in a modern era, a team that put China in second place, and more than half a dozen who won gold in London 4 years ago and did it all again in Rio. We'll talk of future funding in a moment, but first, Sejal Carrier on 2 Weeks to Remember.
If there's one thing Brazil knows how to do, it's to throw a party, and it didn't disappoint at the closing of these games. It was quite simply a dazzling carnival-inspired theme, with dancers morphing into some of the country's iconic landmarks. Team GB among the athletes featuring in the parade, complete with their patriotic flashing footwear. The ceremony capping off a record-breaking Games for Britain with the biggest medal haul in more than a century, 67 in total. Super heavyweight Joey Joyce was the final British medal winner, a silver for him, narrowly losing out on a gold to France's Tony Yoka. And as well as medals, there could be honours for Britain's athletes after the Prime Minister said there would be no cap on the number of awards available. Mo Farah likely to be among the first in line after completing the double-double, becoming only the second man to retain both the 5,000 and 10,000 metre Olympic titles. In cycling, Jason Kenny equals the Chris Hoy's British record of 6 Olympic gold medals. Cheered on by fiancée Laura Trott. She had earlier retained her Omnium title to become the first British woman to win 4 Olympic gold medals. They were Rio's golden couple. Max Whitlock won Britain's first ever Olympic gymnastics gold with victory in the men's floor. He gained another on the same day in the men's pommel horse.
The Olympic triathlon champion for the second time.
And the brilliant Brownlee brothers clinched the top 2 spots in the triathlon. Alistair winning a gold, his younger sibling Johnny a silver.
There's no nation that actually has done what we've done, actually is win more medals at the Games after hosting. That's the start. I don't think there's any nation that's actually increased their medal haul over a 5-game period. That's, so we are actually up there now with the superpowers.
So Rio has now passed the baton on to Tokyo, who are hosting the Games in 2020. A glimpse of their plans on display at the closing ceremony, while the fireworks brought the final curtain call in Brazil. Sejal Carrier, ITV News.
In charge of keeping Team GB in order, come success or failure, is Chef de Mission Mark England. I spoke to him from Rio just a short while ago, and I began by asking him, with Downing Street saying today that there is no limit on the number of honours that might be given, how on earth would he decide?
Well, it'll be a panel, I think, because the quality and the performances from so many athletes, Alistair, has just been absolutely fantastic out here in Rio. We're very, very proud to have done something that no other nation has ever done before, which is to beat a Games where you've hosted a Games in terms of medal success is just phenomenal, and 67 medals, but so many more medalists, a plane full of medalists arriving back to Heathrow tomorrow morning will just be fabulous. So yeah, nice problem to have for sure.
Not such a nice problem for you was, apart from managing the brilliant success of people like Laura Trott and Jason Kenny, there was a bit of heartbreak you had to manage as well, people like Tom Daley. What a mix of emotions.
Yes, Tom and David Florence in canoe slalom. I spoke to Tom last evening just to congratulate him in the way that he conducted himself, both of his post-event press conferences, fronting up, which was obviously, I think his coach has said, a calamitous display in the diving tank. For me, it's just one of those days that everybody has, whatever walk of life they're in, that you know, nothing more could possibly go wrong. So for me, it was just an opportunity just to say, you know, just forget about it, put it behind you, because Tom and David, both of them, absolutely world-class athletes in their own right.
When you look forward, as a matter of policy, as a matter of strategy, do you believe that we should be backing the winners who've already done well, or giving a hand up to, as it were, the also-rans?
Well, it's a strong investment programme that Great Britain has, and the public should be very proud of the part they play in it in terms of lottery and government funding. I mean, that's critical to the success. And what we've seen here is the broader scale of investment and the broader scale of sports that have received investment and returned medals for that. So it's critically important that that continues. But it's also important that all of government and the appropriate agencies back in the UK actually understand that it's an opportunity to really invest in young talent and really invest in pathways that bring talented youngsters through to the elite level. And I'm sure there'll be discussions over the coming months about how best to do that.
Team GB's Mark England speaking to me a little earlier. Other news now, and convicted extremists who promote terror and violence will be isolated from the rest of the prison population, the government said today. The Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, says those who poison the minds of others will be put in special units in jails in England and Wales after a report into radicalisation in jails. Richard Pallow has the details.
Today we find
the recent conviction of hate preacher Anjem Choudhury may have removed his poisonous influence from British streets. Yet there remains real fear over how leading Islamist extremists can exert just as much control from within a jail as they once did from outside. So the government now wants to house the most dangerous of them in separate units, cut off from the general prison population that they seek to radicalise.
It's a growing threat in our country. And we cannot have safe prisons. We cannot have prisons which are reforming inmates when we have these serious problems with extremism. So it's a priority for me.
Among the problems highlighted by a government report were the aggressive encouragement of prisoners to convert to Islam and advocating support for so-called Islamic State. Attempts to engineer segregation by landing, wing or even prison. And officers forced to leave prayer rooms during unsupervised worship, exploiting a fear among staff of being called racist. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, Republican and Loyalist prisoners were segregated in the Maze jail. But the fact they gained substantial control of their wings back then is something critics believe might now be replicated.
The unit should be a temporary place for a very small number of people. So we need to watch very carefully that they don't become a long-term home for a larger number of people. If that happens, they'll just be a recruiting tool for the extremists. But the other thing that needs to happen is that the prisoners who might be radicalised need a better life to hope for. And prisons at the moment don't give people hope.
Budgets will be found for specialist training for officers, but most prisons remain overstretched and understaffed. And housing the most dangerous extremists together could just end up concentrating the problem rather than eradicating it altogether. Richard Pallow, ITV News.
In the last few minutes, a woman and a teenager have been arrested for trying to travel to Syria and join an illegal group. The 16 and 20-year-olds were held in central London yesterday on suspicion of preparing terrorist acts. Meanwhile, a plot to fly a large quantity of drugs into Pentonville prison in North London using drones has been foiled. The first one crashed while it was being tracked by the police, and the second was caught by an officer mid-flight, both carrying bags of drugs and mobile phones. Disgraced Radio 1 DJ Chris Denning has pleaded guilty to 21 historical child sex offences as part of a police investigation into a long-running youth disco. The 75-year-old admitted to abusing 11 children, some as young as 8, between 1969 and 1986. And a 2-year-old girl from Surrey remains in a critical condition after she and her family were swept out to sea. Her father couldn't be revived. Rudy Broyes was one of 6 people who drowned in a series of tragedies at British beaches over the weekend. A minute's silence has just been held to remember the 11 men killed in the Shoreham air disaster which happened a year ago today. The families of those who died attended a memorial event near the crash site, together with representatives from the emergency services. The crash was the deadliest at a British air show in over 50 years. Sally Biddulph reports.
Exactly a year ago, a vintage Hawker Hunter jet began a loop-the-loop at Shoreham Air Show. Moments later, it crashed into the busy A27 dual carriageway. 11 people were killed, all men spanning 6 generations. One of the youngest was 23-year-old Jacob Schilt. A year on, his parents still can't believe it.
Bewildering, shocking,
devastating.
Devastating.
And surreal as well.
Yes.
You would never think that such a thing could happen. It's not one of the things that you'd be worrying about. You might worry that there might be a car crash. I worried when he went on nights out, but I thought he was on his way to a football match. It never occurred to me that a plane could drop out of the sky onto their car. It's just an outrageous thing to happen.
Remarkably, the pilot, Andrew Hill, survived. He's been questioned voluntarily by police on suspicion of possible manslaughter by gross negligence. Officers now want more information about the flight, which they're pursuing through the courts.
Well, we're currently waiting for the decision of the High Court in relation to the release of protected material currently held by the Air Accident Investigation Branch.
This year there is no Shoreham Air Show out of respect for those who died. The wait for answers for the families goes on. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Reporter Neil Connery is live near the scene of the crash now, where that silence has just taken place. Neil, clearly very difficult for the families of those who were killed at the Shoreham air disaster.
Yes, Alistair, a simple and dignified service here a short time ago. Some of the families and their friends of the victims still here. They laid flowers, a list of the names of the victims was read out, and then doves were released into the sky. A very difficult day, as you say, another difficult stage on their journey of grief. And I think what has compounded that grief has been a sense of frustration that some of the families have felt with the bureaucracy they're having to deal with all of this. They are desperate for answers and desperate for clarity as to what happened here 1 year ago. As we know, the criminal investigation continues. The Air Accident Investigation Branch report is due this October. But on a day like today in particular, I think for the families, they are desperate for answers as quickly as possible.
Neil, thank you. Still to come on the Lunchtime News, the Labour leadership contest gets underway as nearly 650,000 ballot papers are sent out to prospective voters. But first, the number of teenage girls suffering from depression has surged in the last decade, according to a new report for the Department for Education. The report found that 37% of teenage girls suffered from 3 or more symptoms of psychological distress, such as feeling unhappy or worthless, and that's around 10% higher than in 2005. It compared with 15% of boys suffering with the same problems. But both boys and girls were 5% more likely to suffer if their parents were educated to degree level. Well, I'm joined now to discuss this by Fionnuala Kennedy, the Deputy Head of Wimbledon High Street, there on the left of your picture, and Marjorie Wallace from the mental health charity SANE. Marjorie, is this an epidemic, or have we just had the wit to ask the right questions this time?
It's a slow-growing epidemic, because when I founded SANE 30 years ago, with young girls like this in their teens, we would have a cry for distress. They would have a penknife to the wrist, they would have a small overdose. But now, the escalation, not only in the scale, but the severity of self-harm, for instance, is such that, in fact, the amount of people admitted to psychiatric hospital has gone up by 52% in that age group.
That's the acute end of it, as it were. The report also finds that this preponderance of young women, teenage girls, who are coming from well-educated families. Bluntly, mum and dad too busy.
I think that is one aspect of it in some families, and there's no doubt about that. But I think also we mustn't underestimate the pressures that social media has brought to young people's lives in terms of their self-confidence and their sense of identity. And one of the key things that we do at GDST schools, of which Wimbledon High is one, is equip our girls early on to have the skills to notice when they are starting to feel pressure and to do something about it. It's all about early intervention. I know that companies like SANE absolutely encourage early intervention.
And it's intriguing, isn't it? Because so many of the symptoms and pressures remain the same, but the solution's different, because this report also finds that drug use, alcohol abuse, self-harm are down.
Yes, and I think it's a lot to do, as you're saying, with this sort of new cyber world that people are in, because these girls are trapped. But if they do take part in all this world, 24 hours 7, it's relentless. And if they are trapped like that, they have to be in touch, and they have no rest. But if they don't, then they are isolated. Either way, their loneliness increases because their friends are mainly cyber friends and real friends go away.
You're talking to mums and dads day in, day out as a deputy head, but also, crucially, to the young women who you're educated. What's the message for folk listening to this, be they mums and dads or teenage girls?
It's very much, we're all in this together. The social world doesn't just impact on teenagers, and what we've done at Wimbledon High is get parents, girls and staff all to agree to certain rules. We never have our phones at meals. We always switch off at 9 p.m. We must all take responsibility for this, because if we're going to let our young people grow into well-rounded, robust, strong adults, that's what we have to do.
And for Her Majesty's government?
Well, definitely early intervention, far more money put into identifying depression, anxiety early, because
it's their report.
It's their report.
Will they act on it?
And they should act on that, because, in fact, most mental illness in later life starts at this age group.
That's right.
All right, Marjorie and Fionnuala, thank you both very much indeed for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, nearly half of the 51 victims killed during a Kurdish wedding in Turkey were children, including a 3-month-old baby. The suicide attack happened on Saturday evening in a city near to the Syrian border. The bomber is believed to have been a child himself, aged between 12 and 14. It is suspected that he had links to so-called Islamic State. North Korea's military has used its state-run news agency to threaten nuclear attacks on Seoul and Washington. The war rhetoric comes as South Korea and the United States begin their annual allied military drills. Here, nearly 650,000 ballot papers are being sent out today for the Labour leadership contest. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is up against Owen Smith, who was the party's former Shadow Work and Pensions Minister. Well, Angus Walker joins me live now from Westminster. Angus, we're getting now to the business end of this feisty contest.
Yes, as you say, ballot papers going out today. This is an example of it. A big ballot paper, big question for the Labour Party, and a lot of people, more than 500,000, have the right to vote in this contest. A lot of people, of course, have joined very recently, and let's just see how the people who have the right to vote in this contest break down. First of all, we have about 350,000 Labour Party members, and then there are 129,000 people who are signed up registered supporters, and the rest 168,000 from the unions and other organisations. So Labour has an electorate, has a membership larger than all the other political parties put together.
And what have the candidates themselves been saying today, Angus?
I was listening to Owen Smith. He was speaking at an event in Wales today, painting himself as the unity candidate, throwing some olive branches in the direction of the grassroots. He must know that a lot of the registered supporters do not support him. The majority voted for Jeremy Corbyn last year, for example. He said conference would have a vote on the manifesto, for example. painting himself as the candidate who could bring Labour back into power, and Jeremy Corbyn as the candidate who led a protest movement.
My plea to the Labour movement is that we do unite and heal, whatever the outcome of this election. And I am anticipating winning, because I think people are realising around the country that the outcome of Jeremy winning is more of the same. More divisions between party and parliament, more divisions within the parliamentary party, and us being an ineffective opposition to the Tories.
Well, I put some of the points that Owen Smith was making to the leader of Jeremy Corbyn's campaign today. Of course, he dismissed Owen Smith's points. He talked about the amount of support they have in the grassroots, saying, you know, thousands and thousands of members who've been out on the streets, that they have about £50 million in the bank to spend on campaigning, very much looking forward to a general election. So Owen Smith basically saying he's got the political power here in Parliament. Owen Smith also saying that Jeremy Corbyn only has the support out there in the grassroots.
Angus, thank you. Finally, tennis, and following off his gold medal in Rio, Andy Murray's 22-game unbeaten run has come to an end. The Scot lost to Marin Cilic in the Cincinnati final in his last defeat since the final of the French Open in June. But the Wimbledon champion was not too downhearted when looking back on his run, saying the experience had been really good, but added there were still things he could improve on.
I mean, the last 4 or 5 months have been, I mean, it's not even close to anything else I'd done before. It was way better. Seven finals in a row, you know, and won obviously Wimbledon again, the Olympics, and yeah, I still feel like there's some things that I can improve upon, but yeah, it's been really good.
Andy Murray. And that is it this lunchtime. I'll be here with Mary Nightingale for the ITV Evening News at 6:30. The news where you are follows the weather. But for now, from all of us, bye-bye.